Hey folks, Baxel here. Today's guide is a little bit different than what we've already covered, as I'm mainly going to be talking about sort of mentality and how to focus on improving yourself and how to actually make that mean something instead of it just being something we sort of say as random inspirational stuff. Like, let's face facts, if we want to improve at something, we don't really care how we get there to a certain extent, and obviously there are some people who take that to the extreme where it's unhealthy for them, and there are some people who just want to sort of start improving little by little and they're not too bothered about how quickly they improve. So appreciate that there's a wide range of people who may want to improve, but also what's really important to note is I'm not a therapist. I have no real experience with any sort of life coaching or advice in that sense, so do take everything I say with a grain of salt. This is just from my experience and how I choose to sort of improve and how I keep my mental quite stable. I'm not saying I don't break. I do get really frustrated sometimes, and we'll talk a little bit about how I process things and how I try to continually improve even on bad days and what have you. So our first tip is about finding your motivation. Now, there's intrinsic and extrinsic types of motivation. What we mean by this is you've got sort of your internal things. For example, if you're a race car driver and you love driving, that's what you are, that's what you do, is you drive. But in our instance, this would be, I love playing the game. Every match I play, I enjoy. So you may have a goal, but it may not be the sole motivation. The motivation may just be to like play the best you can, because that's when you feel best about it. And that's very much how I perceive the game, is I really like playing well. I like being teammates who play well, and I want to climb as much as I can so that I can enjoy the highest quality of play, because that's what I find the best. So it's not about the rank, it's not about any sort of reputation that it gives me, it's just about getting there so I can feel satisfied with myself and that my gameplay is good. That's what I like. I don't have any aspirations to go pro or anything like that. External goals then would be those sorts of aspirations, right? If your drive is I want to go pro, or I want to hit this rank because I feel like that's an achievement, then what you have to appreciate is when we as people have our struggles, whether our goals are internal or external in this sense, we've just got to remember what's motivating us if we want to keep playing. And of course, the most important thing is if you're finding that your motivations aren't something you can do whilst gaining some kind of pleasure from doing it, then it may be time to take a step back, because you're not having the right sort of motivation and the right sort of pleasure whilst playing this game. So that is definitely something to consider. Our next tip is about self-awareness. So all of these things are quite interlinked, but I've just tried to sort of categorize different ways we can think about our mental and how to improve. So for self-awareness, what is our role within the game? Are we actually performing our role? Are we shifting blame to other people, for example, saying, oh, well, they didn't do enough, when already there's something in our role that we failed? So even though somebody else has failed their role, it's important to think about sort of what your responsibility is within the scope of the game. And if you didn't achieve every single thing that you should be doing, then maybe you can learn to reflect inwards, which is really important. So that goes on to communication as well. It's one thing to give somebody a good comm, that's useful information that should be comm. It's another thing to reflect on how you're saying it and how it may make somebody feel. So I'm very guilty of this. My tone is awful a lot of the time. I really struggle with trying to be friendly and kind in the way that I speak. I try and make my actions as friendly and as kind as I can, but when I'm a little bit frustrated in game, the way I speak to people is not okay. And that's definitely something that I do try and work on, and I try to give people respect and communicate in a way that makes them want to work with me. That's really important, is if you communicate properly, people will want to listen to you. They'll want to be your friend, be your teammate, you know? So there's definitely something that we have to be aware of, is how we're communicating with one another. A mental state, again, so when you recognize that your mental state is declining, you're tilting, you're getting frustrated, if you don't have that switch in your mind that says, okay, right now we're frustrated, we need to resolve this issue, but you come out of the game afterwards and you go, oh, I was so tilted, that's a sign that we're not being self-aware enough. And it can be troublesome for some people. For example, I'm diagnosed autistic, so for me, I definitely struggle with this one. I find it really hard to acknowledge and reflect when I'm frustrated and upset. What I often do to offset this is I try and vocalize things. When I go, oh, why did this happen? I try and go, okay, I'm not trying to take it out on my teammate. I'm frustrated that my movement wasn't perfect and I suffered as a result of my teammate also not being perfect. I need to acknowledge the part that I played in this. If I vocalize what's happened, I find that I'm able to move on a lot quicker. So that's how I try to be self-aware of my mental state, is I will talk to myself about what's going on. And that's not necessarily going to work for everybody, but it is definitely something that I do. And it goes on nicely to our next point, which is accepting tilt. So like I said, for me, it's about verbalizing it. It's about talking it through, whether I'm on my own, not in a call, not streaming. It doesn't matter. I need to find a way to figure out that I'm tilted and accept it and move on. If you find yourself frustrated and you can't help but focus on that frustration in a game, you're never going to improve. You're always going to be playing the blame game. You're always going to assume that your team is worse than the enemy team, and all of these frustrating things is because you're not acknowledging that some of your frustration is just due to your inner imbalance of how you're perceiving things and how you're feeling. If you went into every game positive and you stayed positive from the beginning to the end of each game, you, in theory, will improve much better than people who allow things like negative emotions to impact their decision making. It can be really hard to manage that state and to accept that we are going to be frustrated because we're not perfect. But if you do, and you learn to accept it and move on from it as quickly as possible and not let it hinder your gameplay, and you should, in theory, be happier playing the game and be able to play it for longer if that's what you want to do. And most importantly, is you will improve quicker. Like, that's just a fact, unfortunately, is you can't be mad at the thing that you're doing and you're trying to improve at, because you will always have negative experiences if you're not happy. So it's important that we work on that. And like I said before, I'm not a therapist, but if you do find yourself constantly frustrated, or you feel like your mood is being impacted by playing a game, I would strongly recommend speaking to a medical professional who may be able to give you help. So lastly, we're going to talk about benefiting from our losses. So what I mean by this is you can increase your improvement by 50% if you benefit from your losses. If like we've already talked about, you're frustrated from each loss, then you're going to be in a position where your mind is clouded whilst you're losing, and you can't acknowledge what you can and cannot improve on. Like we've touched on before, is reviewing your footage of gameplay and finding out where you can improve is really important, and comparing that to high-level players of the heroes that you play. That can absolutely help you improve. But if we're mad during the game, we're not going to see the issues that we're doing. And it's important that whilst we're playing, even if we do have an external goal of improving, and this is what we're going to tie this into for our last few points here, is if you can't improve during the game whilst you're losing, you're not going to be able to benefit. So you need to take accountability for what's happening in the game and you're losing, and you need to make sure that you're using every single game you play, win or lose, to your benefit. So that's the accountability aspect as well, right? Is understanding where you've gone wrong and how that's impacted your team to lose. And I would further on from that and say, if you're playing for the sole purpose of being the best player you can, assume that your teammates are irrelevant. Have a big ego. Give them comms, give them guidance, treat them fairly, treat them with kindness, of course. But when you're thinking about the game and how it was winnable, you shouldn't utter words like it was unwinnable. My team threw. Because that's not fair. You are 1/6 of the team, and if you're exceptional at the game and you did everything perfect, it is very, very likely that you could have won the game for your team. So we should be striving for that instead of shifting blame. And that survivorship bias is something I wanted to touch on. If you've not heard of this term before, it's basically the idea that, for example, something that was sort of touched on quite heavily during World War II, I believe, when they found that aeroplanes were coming back with bullet holes in them. So they started to put plating in those areas. Now, following this, they found that it didn't improve the survival rate of those pilots. So what you actually had to do is put the armor where the bullet holes weren't, because that's where fatal shots were being taken. It would hit the engine and what have you, and that's why the planes weren't returning, is because they needed the armor where they weren't seeing the bullet wounds. So it's important when you lose that you recognize that you are playing well, and when you are playing well, sometimes it's out of your control, or sometimes when you're winning, it's not due to you being the cause of success. It's due to your teammates being the cause of success. They may not have more souls than you. They may not have more damage than you, but they may have had an impact that's hard for you to quantify, that you need to start acknowledging as the reason as to why you win. So it's important we shift our mindset both in winning and losing so that we understand where our biases may be, and this ties back to all of what we've talked about before. So this is now the final point. This is consistency. So our mental state, we need to be aware of it, we need to be able to manage it, and we need to make it consistent. If we're finding that we have a good mood in the evenings, then if what we're really dedicated to is improving, then we want to play during the evening. If we're finding that in the mornings when we're grumpy, it's easier to go do your chores, go do the dishes, go do the laundry whilst you're grumpy because it doesn't really affect the dishes getting done. Maybe you take that time to clear your mind, right? And then when you're in a good position, when you've had a routine, you've had your breakfast, you've been to school, you've been to work, you've had a moment to calm down, you've taken a shower, whatever it may be, if you're then ready to play, that's when you want to play it, right? And if you can make it a consistent part of your life, and that's what you want for yourself, then absolutely that will help you. Routines are excellent at a way of shaping our brain to acknowledge that we're going to do something. If you talk to somebody who's big into their fitness and goes to the gym regularly, you'll find that because it's the evening when they train, or because it's the first thing they do in the morning when they train, their body's ready to go. They know that it's time now to train, and they're going to put the effort in. And I believe there was a clip of like David Goggins talking about the fact that sometimes he sits there for half an hour struggling to put his shoes on before he goes for a run, but he still gets them on and he still does it. It's not, routines aren't going to solve everything, but they're going to give you a commitment, and the more you practice it, the more you're going to be comfortable with it. Now, again, tying into all of this, energy levels. So if we find ourselves not being able to perform, maybe have an alt account. Maybe have an account where you say, I'm not confident about today. And you use that as a learning experience. You make sure that every time you play, you're confident you're going to win. Or that you're confident that you can have an impact and you can play well. And then just lastly, sort of leaning more into game-specific advice, hero pool. So if we're playing lots and lots of heroes, we're never going to be consistent. At the end of the day, in previous MOBAs, people have made careers out of playing a single hero. Now, that's not necessarily true in the greatest scheme of somebody's career, but definitely for a long time, people will gain a reputation as being the ex-hero player, whatever it may be. And this sort of consistency on learning to improve the game through the lens of a single hero will really develop you into a much better player than trying to mix and match and play a bit of everything. When you do that, you limit your experiences to ones that are sort of one-offs and really rare and unreplicable on other heroes. Because fortunately for the game design aspect, Deadlock is a wonderfully wide and varied game, and the way you play each hero, to me personally at the very least, feels very different. You have lots of great experiences that you can tap into. But if you commit to a hero role and a very select few heroes within that role, every time you play you'll be improving on a foundation of knowledge and experience that you already have. And to me, that helps with everything we've already talked about learning to de-tilt from situations. Because if you already know sort of how to play from a losing state on a hero, you're going to be so much more comfortable in that, and you're going to be more confident. And that's really important, is if we're consistent and we're confident, we know that we can improve. So I appreciate this isn't my normal video, and I don't aim to make these sorts of things ever again. I may touch on it once or twice more, but I just wanted to give my 2 cents of sort of how you can look at your mental and how you can think about approaching learning more, and not focusing on things like winning and losing and letting that ruin your day. Because if we're focusing on ourselves, then we'll have a much better time overall, and our performance will grow, whether it's something we're hard focusing on or something that we're just nurturing. Thanks again. Have a good day.